this computer, so it should be a little easier from here on out. All right, so I'm actually going to transition into another cabin that we built last semester. It's a little bit more complete than the previous one that I had started drawing elevations of this semester. So I'm going to go ahead and use this one. This will work better for what I'm doing today. Okay, so right now, or either you'll have something that looks similar to this or close. If not, what I would do is maybe focus on completing one elevation today or one side of the building. Then you can start to work on the Photoshop aspects of that in this class, so you at least have the opportunity to ask me questions should you need to do that. And if you still have a little extra work to do on the rest of the sides of the building, you can work on them over the next couple days. All you're looking to do is to complete 2 of your elevations for this exercise. The other 2 can be completed between now and before you turn in assignment number 6. Okay, so you should have something that looks kind of like this, or some resemblance of your mountain cabin. What you're going to want to do is pick a side. Maybe today you pick kind of the most dramatic side of your building. Everybody probably has a side of their building that's probably the most prominent. It's probably usually the entry of your building that has, you know, lots of glass, or has some special feature, or it has you know, some dramatic features to the roof, or whatever it might be. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and choose this side of the building to create my elevations. All right. So a couple classes ago, we talked about how to create scenes. Okay, when we created the scenes, what that allows us to do is to always come back to a certain view, and you know that every time you go back to it, it'll always be exactly the same, correct? So I'm going to go ahead and create a scene of this elevation. You're going to want to end up creating a scene for all 4 of your elevations, okay? And then eventually you'll be creating scenes for your perspective and your sections, etc., and your plan view. So what we're doing today, we're going to do for all 4 of our elevations. We're going to do the same or a very similar process to our sections. We'll do likewise a similar process for plans and our perspectives. Okay, so this is really the part of the semester, in my opinion, it's probably the most fun of everything that we're doing. We're really starting to create the really nice imagery that we've, you know, kind of been working up towards. It's kind of like working on remodeling your house and it kind of being in disarray for a couple months, and then, you know, as you get down to the final finish and you're starting to see all the paint go on and all the nice materials, and it starts to really have some life and some character. So that's really what we're going to be working on for the next 2 weeks before submitting our portfolios. All right, so we're almost done, and we're winding down to the very end. Okay, so let's set up our first elevation view. What we're going to do is we're going to go up to where it says camera, and then we're going to go down to standard views. Okay, and we're going to look at we're going to look at front, back, left, and right. Okay, essentially those are all the same as north, east, south, west, but since those aren't really assigned, or they're not assigned in SketchUp, they're not going to label that in the menu. Okay, so let's start out by figuring out which elevation is going to be this front view. Let's try front. So that's not quite the view that I want. That's actually the neighboring one. So let's try left. Okay, that's the other side of the one I want. So let's just do right, and that will be the one that we want. Okay, notice that when we select right for our view, notice that we don't quite have a pure elevation yet. Okay, there's actually still some perspective to our view that we're looking at. All right, so in order to get a pure elevation of our building, we're going to go up to camera, and we're going to uncheck. Actually, you don't have to uncheck perspective, but you're going to go ahead and just click on parallel projection. Okay, what that will do is that will uncheck perspective and go ahead and put on the pure elevation that we're looking for. Okay, so like last class, we don't need our little SketchUp man, so we can go ahead and delete him. If we want to add a person into our model, into our elevation a little bit later, we'll actually put in a realistic image, because our end goal for what we're doing today is to have an elevation of our building, but for it to look as realistic as possible. Okay, so essentially we're doing a rendering elevation, not just your basic line elevation that you guys have done thus far. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and delete our little SketchUp man. And I'm going to go ahead and position my elevation in a sense that it fills up a majority of my screen, okay? You don't want something like this where it's really, really far back, because then when you export your image, it's gonna be really teeny tiny, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and enlarge this so that it fills up a majority of the screen, and we're gonna go over to scenes, and we're gonna click on the plus button so that we add that to a scene. Now by default, the SketchUp calls this scene 1, all right? I'm gonna right click, rename, I'm gonna call this, yeah, we'll just call this north elevation or left elevation, whatever you wanna call it. Okay, so that, all right, come on, didn't change it. North elevation. All right, so our scene is now called north elevation, and we're gonna do a couple more things before we start to export this, all right? Remember that when you export images from SketchUp, that it will export whatever is on the screen. It won't export the menus, but it will export your guides and your axes, okay? So we're gonna go up to view, and we're gonna go ahead and turn off guides, and we're also gonna turn off axes, okay? And we don't have any section cuts, so we don't need to turn off that, all right? I'm gonna go and click on, or up here in my scenes, there's this little button that you see right here to the left of a plus sign. That's gonna be update scene. I'm gonna go ahead and click on that, hit update, and what I'm doing is I'm now updating the scene. Let's see, update the selected style. I wanna update the scene so that it also turns off the axes and the grid lines, okay? So before, we actually saved that scene with those in it. Now by updating it, it just has the nice pure background, okay? So like last time, we're gonna kind of run through that same routine that we did 2 classes ago when we were working on the Francis Ching house. Okay, so we're gonna do that same little process. I'm gonna run through this relatively quickly because we've done this before. Okay, so the first style that you're going to want to export for your model is going to be the hidden line. Right now, I already have it on hidden line, but just to kind of refresh your memory on where to find that, you're going to click on styles, and then we're going to go to default styles, and then over here on the right hand side, you're going to see the hidden line style. Okay, so let's turn off, I accidentally activated the axes and the guides again. Let's just turn those off. And that's going to be our first style that we're going to export. So again, we're going to go to File, we're going to go to Export, 2D Graphic, and we're going to go ahead and save these to our flash drives. All right, so I'm going to go to week 15B, and I've already created a folder called SketchUp Exports. So I'm going to call this Yosemite House Hidden Line. And remember that we're going to click on Options, and we're going to make adjustments to our image size, okay? Last time we used a width of 3,000 pixels, and that worked relatively well for what we were doing. A way that you can kind of more accurately calculate how many pixels you should actually choose for your export is to think of the media that you might be printing on someday, okay? So this particular export is going to be strictly digital only, but it will eventually be on your portfolio. And in the case if you're working inside your studio, you might be printing out the elevations for a pinup. So you might have your elevations might be as big as a 24 by 36 inch piece of paper. So if you want to plot at, like, let's just say, I think by default, I want to say SketchUp exports at 300 DPI. So if you have a 32 inch, let's just calculate this here on my phone. If you have a 32 inch wide sheet of paper and you want to plot at 300 DPI, all you would just do is multiply 300 times 32, and that would give you the number of pixels that you need for the width of your export, okay? That'll give you a nice, really high resolution image that you're gonna export, okay? It's important that when you're exporting your images and you're selecting your background imagery, that both of those are equally at a nice high resolution, okay? I see it time and time again where people export their images at really low resolutions, and they have this really, really sharp, crisp background for their elevation or for their rendering, and then the Photoshop elevation that they created is really low quality and pixelated, and it just, it doesn't look good. So make sure that you're selecting both high quality background images and you're exporting high quality images from SketchUp. Okay, so 300 DPI at 32 inches wide is actually equal to 9600 pixels. I think the maximum you can go in SketchUp is 9900. Sorry, my file is saving at the moment. I'm just going to give it just a second. The reality is your file is not going to be, or your image is not going to be 32 inches wide. I'm going to go ahead and just save this at about, we'll guess maybe it's 24 inches wide. I'm going to save this at 6000 pixels. Come on. You got to uncheck view size. So I'm going to go ahead and type in 6000 pixels. That will automatically adjust the height, and the best quality is selected. We're going to go ahead and hit OK, and we're going to click export. Now, the next few options to which you guys select, a couple classes ago we selected X-ray, we did shadows, we did a pen gray layer. We kind of did a variety of layers to kind of get the look that we were after in Photoshop. The next couple options are completely up to you. I would definitely do hidden line, and I would definitely do the shadows option that we did last time. Those are kind of the two must that you should definitely do, because you're going to want that nice crisp black and white image, and you're definitely going to want shadows. The others are up to you. I'll do a couple. You might do X-ray if you want to see some of the items inside your house. It's usually a little bit more successful when you're doing perspectives and not so much elevations, but up to you on the next couple layers that you choose to incorporate inside Photoshop. Okay, I'm going to do, let's see, I'm going to do pen gray. So I'm going to go over to sketchy styles. Actually, let's do shadows first. So I'm going to go to edit. I'm going to turn off edges, and I'm going to go down to shadows. Actually, let me turn on edges for just a second, just so I could see my building. And we're going to turn on shadows, and we're going to go ahead and adjust the day and the time so that we can get an effect that we're looking for. We don't want something that's too dramatic. We don't want something that's, doesn't do anything at all. So we're going to kind of mess around with this just a little bit to get a nice dramatic shadow on the exterior face of our building. Okay, so maybe it's something about like that. Notice that I have some shadows underneath my roof overhang on both sides, but it's not too dramatic. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go with that. I'm going to uncheck edges. All right, so I just get my shadows. Remember, the reason why we do this is because we have more flexibility to edit the shadows by themselves versus doing hidden line and shadows together. Okay, so again, file, export, 2D graphic. I don't need to go through the whole options thing again. It'll already be saved. And I'm going to call this shadow and export. All right, so let's turn edges back on. I'm going to go ahead and turn shadows off one more time. Let's look at a couple different styles that we can use. Okay, I'm going to go to sketchy edges. I'm going to turn on the, let's see, brush strokes is a little bit too dramatic. Okay, let's go ahead and use airbrush. That's a pretty good one. So file, export, 2D graphic. Call this airbrush. Now I'm going to do one more before we switch over to Photoshop. I'm going to do one more, and this one is just kind of a suggestion, okay? But if you go back to default styles, I would recommend clicking on one of the styles that has some color incorporated into it, okay? So let's say, for example, this one right here. The reason why is because if you have color, let's say, really what I'm after is I'm not interested in the material that's on the base of my house. It's not an attractive material. Neither really is the wood that's on the roof. I'll actually apply all of those materials in Photoshop because we can get much more realistic materials. But what you might want, and this often is the case, is you might want to be able to select some of the blue from the windows to kind of give your windows a nice blue tint. And for whatever reason, Photoshop, when you're using your magic wand tool, when there's a little bit of color incorporated into these spaces, it allows the magic wand to be able to actually select those spaces a little bit better. Ideally, you don't want a bunch of texture in it, but if you have simple colors, that would probably work a little bit better. I'm just going to see if I have one that won't show the brick. Maybe not. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and use this one. I'm going to export it. You may use it, you may not, but it's good just to have it just in case. Okay, so again, I'm going to turn off my axes and my guides, and I'll go ahead and export this color view just in case we want to utilize it during the process. Alright, export, and that should be good enough to go ahead and get started in Photoshop. Okay, so let's open up Photoshop. Okay, so now that we have Photoshop open, let's open up our first image. We're going to go ahead and open up the hidden line image. So I'm going to go to my thumb drive where I store these, and we're going to open up Yosemite House Hidden Line. Okay, we're going to go through that same sequence that we did last time, and we're going to overlay our other layers on top. So File, we're going to go ahead and go to Place. I'm going to go ahead and put in my shadows, Place. Now, what was the next step? Somebody with a show of hand, what was the next step that we did a couple classes ago in order to make this transparent? Okay, so that we don't have just a pure white background. Somebody? Yep. Yes. So you're going to change your blending mode to multiply. Okay. So you're going to select the layer, Yosemite Shadow, and you're going to change your blending mode to multiply. That allows for the white portion, all of the white on the layer to become transparent, and only the color portions of it to show. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and place the other two on top. So we're going to do Airbrush Place. Notice that all of the elevations are going right on top of each other. That is exactly what we want. The reason why that happens is because we didn't alter the view inside SketchUp. Okay, so again, I'm going to go to multiply. That gives us kind of our sketchy look. And I'm going to do File, Place. Go ahead and put in the color one. Place. And again, I'm going to go to multiply. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off the color one. I don't necessarily need it right now. Again, I just created it just in case I want to pull certain aspects of it, like maybe the windows, or or maybe even the gray bottom of our cabin. So I'm going to turn that off for now, and now we can start to do the photorealistic elements of our elevation. Okay, so for those of you that have created an elevation in the past, and if you actually look at our colored elevation, you notice that we have this nice big bold gray ground plane for the elevation. So we're going to go ahead and create something very similar, but we're going to take it a step further. Okay, so you're always used to seeing that ground plane and elevation. Remember that when you're taking an elevation, that you don't see anything below the ground plane. You might see something below the ground plane if you're creating a section, but we only want to see the ground plane and everything that's above. Okay, so let's turn off this color layer. And the first thing that I'm going to do is, you might instinctively just draw maybe a nice big bold black line along that ground plane that signifies the ground. Okay, we're going to do something a little bit different to make it a little bit more realistic to the scenery that our house is set in. Okay, so I'm going to use my lasso tool, and before I do this, I'm going to create a new layer for my ground plane. Okay, and let's go ahead and rename this ground plane. You may end up having a dozen layers or so it's good to keep these organized. All right, so I'm going to call this ground plane, and I'm going to go ahead and use my lasso tool. Okay, now you could use your polygonal lasso tool, and you could create maybe a nice diagonal line that represents kind of an uneven ground plane, kind of like what we did in SketchUp, but we're going to even loosen it up a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to use my my regular lasso tool, and I'm going to go ahead and draw this in by hand. And the reason why I'm drawing it by hand is because my hand is actually a little shaky, and it's not going to give me a a real steady line. So it'll actually kind of give us the uneven nature of, the ground that we might actually have. Okay, so I'm going to kind of eyeball this, and I'm going to draw my ground plane kind of like that. Maybe it starts to rise a little bit, and like that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and draw it all the way around the bottom of my sheet and all the way back up to where we started. Okay, so from there you can see my boundary. You can see that's nice and uneven. It probably is a little bit more accurate of a representation of the ground plane out in Yosemite. All right, and then I'm going to take my brush tool, click on brush. I'm going to make the brush a nice large size. You can, before I draw in my black ground plane, make sure that you select the layer that says ground plane. I'm going to make my brush all the way. Oops, that's pretty big. Let's make it about this size right here. You guys might choose to do gray. You guys might choose to do black. You might choose to do white. That's completely up to you. I'm going to do black for now, but you might like it a little bit better as a nice kind of softer or medium toned gray. So feel free to kind of experiment on the different ground plane tones that you might use. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and fill in my ground plane like so. Okay, and I'm going to click on my arrow key. I'm going to do Control D for deselect. And that gives us a nice little ground plane. But let's take this a step further, okay? This kind of looks like maybe that might be dirt, okay? The reality is Yosemite, we might have dirt, we might have some grass. So let's look at a couple of the tools that we've looked at earlier in the semester, okay? Does anyone remember the process that we took to get the kind of the fake grass that we created? What tool did we select to create that grass? What was that? I can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Oh, the clone stamp. Yes, you are exactly correct. Okay, so we're going to click on the clone stamp tool, and up here under stamps, we are going to click on clone stamp number 134. That's our grass tool. Okay, remember that we need to hold down Alt. Still working inside our ground plane layer, we're going to hold down Alt, select the black color from the ground plane, and I don't know the size of it looks to be a pretty decent sized piece of grass, but we can go ahead and start to add that and see what that looks like. That looks pretty good. That's about the size that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and drag my grass clone stamp tool all the way across the entire ground plane. Okay, so bear with me for just a sec as I go all the way through this. Okay, so now we're going to have a nice kind of very realistic ground plane in front of our building. Our goal is to get rid of that nice kind of rigid line at the bottom that looks super rigid. So we're going to kind of fix that ourselves by adding the grass. Okay, bear with me for just a sec. Okay, so we might have something that looks like that. All right, look pretty good. That's what we're after. So that will take care of the ground plane portion of our elevation. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next step. Let's go ahead and find a background image for our elevation. Okay, so remember what I'm doing right now. This is a fully rendered elevation. I'm only expecting you to do this one time of your 4 elevations. For the other 3, you can simply add, maybe a more simpler ground plane and just colored realistic textures for your elevation. Okay, so let's go ahead and choose a background image for our elevation. Okay, remember that we like to go ahead and to use our Creative Commons. Okay, so creativecommons.org, and let's search some images that we might use. So we're going to click on Search the Commons. And I'm going to click on Flicker, and I'm going to type in Yosemite Meadow. Okay, we're actually in a pretty heavily wooded area where our site is, so up to you on what background image you're going to find some that have a ton of trees. You're going to find some that don't have as much trees. I don't really care. Pick a background image that looks good and makes sense for your cabin. Okay. We also did a lecture a while back ago where we talked about selecting the appropriate background image. Okay. What were some of the things to look out for when selecting a background image? Resolution, yes. A few others.
Location, like you wouldn't put it on top of the actual map, just so you know itself.
Sure, the location. So you want a realistic location. Any others?
Amount of light.
Amount of light and
Shadow kind of related to that.
sure, shadows, exactly. So it also might be a good idea if when you're selecting a background image, to maybe select the background image first, okay? So that you know how to cast the shadows when you're exporting it from SketchUp. You don't want to have your shadows coming from the right when you have the sun clearly on the left-hand side of the screen. They're all just little things that kind of add to the realism of the rendering that you're creating, okay? I didn't pay a ton of attention to it. I'm going to go ahead and let's click on this image right here. This is actually pretty good. There's a couple minor flaws that we can fix inside Photoshop, but let's go ahead and use this image. But the reality is a lot of these images would work pretty well, okay? This is a nice one. You have you have a little bit of fog in the background. It's kind of a dusk. You're kind of in a little bit more of an intimate scene. This is also a good one over here, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and choose this one right here. And I'm going to go ahead and click on download this photo. I'm going to click on the original size to get the largest size possible. You're going to want to put this in your thumb drive. I actually already have it there, so I'm not going to put it there again, but I'll just save it here for now. And I'm going to go back to Photoshop, and I'm going to do File, Place. And let's go ahead and put in that background image. Okay, it's a little small for what we're working with. I'm going to go ahead and bring it down to the bottom left-hand corner of my screen, and I'm going to enlarge it. Okay, like so. Make sure the image is still nice and crisp, which it looks like it is, so that is okay. The next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to bring my background image to the bottom of my screen. I'm actually going to bring it below my Yosemite shadow layer. Okay, actually before I do anything, I'm going to right click on my background layer, which is actually my hidden line layer, and I'm going to click on layer from background. That will unlock it and just make it a regular layer. Okay, so now we can see our background image. Okay, I'm going to put it above layer 0 for now, and in a second I'll go ahead and bring it below. I'm bringing it on top just so that I can see kind of about where my horizon is. Okay, so I'm going to bring this up just a little bit so that my horizon line in the image is about the same of the horizon line of my elevation or my perspective that you might be working on. So it's probably pretty accurate at about this stage right here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it right there. And a couple things to think about before placing this image. Now, of course, we do have a little bit of a hill over here on the left side, okay? And that's okay. That's kind of a part of our scenery that we're in. There are a lot of hills, so we're okay with that. But we also have a little bit of perspective to our trees, okay? You can actually see that our trees are kind of leaning in this way. Our trees are even leaning in this way just a little bit, okay? So we can fix that pretty easily by going over to Image. We're going to go to, Edit, and we're going to go to Transform, and I'm going to go to Warp, okay? Let me make this a little bit smaller, but by going to Warp, that will allow us to manipulate only kind of certain quadrants of our image, okay? So from here, I can go and click on maybe just this upper edge. Notice that my trees are starting to straighten out a little bit on the sides of my image, okay? I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. And just a little bit of messing around with that will, that straightens out our trees right there. That looks a lot better. that looks like we're a lot more in the elevation that we're trying to achieve. You're never going to find a background image that's perfectly in pure elevation, so don't worry about spending time trying to find that, but get it as close as you can, and that will work. That will work great. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hide this layer for the time being. Okay, I'm going to hide this layer. I'm also going to hide my ground plane. Okay, and what we're going to want to do is, you notice that before I hid those layers, notice that our background image is showing through our cabin. Okay, so what we're going to do to fix that, we're going to turn off the background, we're going to turn off the ground plane, we're going to select our layer 0, okay, and I'm going to use my magic wand tool, and I'm going to select the outer perimeter of the cabin. Okay, from there you're going to go ahead and click on select. You're going to go to inverse. All right, so now I'm selecting only the outer perimeter of just the cabin. Okay, if you have things like windows, okay, you might have windows like I do here and here, here and here, and even maybe in this door back here in the background. You might even select those as well, because what we're going to do is we're going to create a layer. We're going to create a layer mask that basically removes all of the things from behind the house. Okay, so I am not going to select these windows for now. I'll go back and kind of show you how to do that in a few minutes. I'm going to keep it relatively simple for this go around. So now that I have this cabin selected, I can go ahead and turn back on my background layer that I created. I'm going to select that background layer, and I'm going to click on create new, or let's say, I'm going to click on add layer mask. Okay, oops, sorry. I inversed it too soon. So let's go up to layer, select, let's actually, this is the inverse that we want. And now let's go ahead and try that again. And that's actually what we want. Okay, so we've removed the background from our cabin, but we kept everything on the outer extents. I can go ahead and turn back on my ground plane, and we're getting a little bit closer to what we want for our final product. All right, so let's go ahead and start to add some materials. All right, so I am going to ask myself the question, what materials am I going to want for this project? You guys probably already have this in mind. You might choose concrete, you might have some kind of typical architectural sidings, you might have some roof materials that you're going to think of. So think about what it is that you want, okay? For me, I'm going to go ahead and choose a brick texture. I'm going to put brick on, or maybe stone on the bottom portion of my base of my house, okay? Before I do that, let me go ahead and save this. Let's not forget that. The last thing we want this to do is to crash and lose our whole project. So let's save this. Okay, and let's find our first material. So I'm going to go back to Creative Commons, and I'm going to search. I would always recommend searching with the word seamless. Okay, if you type in the word seamless first, what that will do is that will give you images that work really well by putting them side to side. What you don't want to see is that vertical line that separates all of your images that you're bringing inside your file. So I'm going to type in maybe seamless stone, and let's see what we get. We may get what we want. We may actually want to use Google for this. Google tends to find patterns a little bit better. Okay, one of these actually might work. Now let's actually use this one. That actually looks pretty realistic. So I'm going to download this. Let's put this somewhere where we can use it. Okay, and now I'm going to bring this into Photoshop. I'm going to turn off my ground plane for now so that I can kind of see everything. And I'm going to do File, Place, and I'm going to click on that stone texture, place it in my file. Okay, the next thing that you're going to want to think about is, let's go ahead and hit Place, and I'm going to move that to the top of my layers. The next thing you're going to want to think about is how big should your texture be. Okay, you want to make sure that it's the right size. You may have to scale it up, you may have to scale it down so that it looks in proportion to the rest of my to the rest of your building, okay? So mine is probably pretty close to the right size. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna tile this texture to fill all of the areas that we want it to cover. So for me, I want it to fill these base elements. So I'm gonna right click on this, duplicate, okay, and I'm gonna move it down, okay? So, and then I'm going to maybe select both of these, duplicate it, and I'm gonna move it over, okay? Notice that it's actually a seamless texture in the X or in the X direction, but it's not really seamless the other way. That's okay, it's still gonna look pretty realistic. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and maybe then select all four. Let's duplicate all of these. I'm gonna move them over to hover them right over my other base. Let's duplicate these again and bring them over here. Let's do this a couple more times. And probably just one more time. Okay, so that will do it. So that will actually put the stone on the base of my building, okay? So from here, I'm going to take all of the textures that I just added. I'm gonna select them all, and I'm gonna go ahead and right click and click on merge layers. That will merge all of those textures into one layer so you don't have 40 layers of image files in your building. I'm gonna go ahead and rename this stone texture. Okay, and we're gonna do that same process that we just did for the background of our image, but we're gonna do it for the base of our building, okay? So I'm gonna turn off the stone for just a second, click on layer 0. I'm gonna use my magic wand, and I'm gonna go ahead and select the base of both of my, of both portions of my building, turn my stone texture back on, select my stone texture, and we're gonna click on create layer mask. Okay, so now notice that that stone texture is only on the base of our building. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna do the same thing to the rest of the components of your building. Okay, you may need to do it a little bit to the interior. You're probably gonna have to do things like your glazing. You don't have to do realistic textures for every single portion of your building. You may be able to just use some simple colors, okay? So for example, my mullions or my framing around my window, I'm just gonna use a simple maybe gray color to kind of represent kind of an aluminum mullion, okay? So again, I'm gonna select my layer 0, use my magic wand, and I'm gonna select the boundary all the way around my windows, which that looked like it did perfectly, so I'm good with that. I'm going to hold down shift and also select the other ones. From there, I can go up to layer. I could click on new fill layer, solid color. Okay, I'm going to call this mullion color and hit OK. Now, why would I add a new fill layer versus just a regular layer? Both would technically work just fine. You could get the same end result. But what would be the benefit of adding a fill layer versus a regular layer? Anybody? Fill layer versus a regular layer. Yeah.
I don't really know, but I think fill actually becomes part of the picture.
Not necessarily. The benefit of choosing the fill layer is that you can always go back and change the color at any given point, okay? So let's just say I choose this gray color right here. I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. And then maybe you're like, you know what? I actually want it to be, you know, a lighter gray, or maybe I want the mullions to be, you know, red for whatever reason. I don't know. But you can go over here, double click on the color, and you can change the color to whatever it is that you want. You might want something that kind of resembles wood. Who knows, okay? So you can do that easily by creating a fill layer. If you choose just a regular layer, you could fill it in with a color, but you're not gonna be able to go back and easily change it, okay? So I'm gonna leave it gray like so. Go ahead and hit OK, and I'll leave it at that, okay? I am gonna do the same thing for the, ideally I would want this to be wood. I could do a tiling wood texture. I'm gonna do this quicker and just do a color for now, but you might consider for the larger, more expansive areas to use actual textures. So again, I'm gonna click on layer 0. I'm gonna select these different portions like this. Okay, actually, you know what? I'm going to make these a slightly different color than my roof. Again, image, layer, new fill layer, solid color. Okay, and I'm going to do something very similar for my roof. Call this one roof, and I'm going to go ahead and make this maybe a nice dark brown. Okay, this would obviously probably look better if I used an actual wood texture. I'll go back and do that here in just a few minutes. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK. That's going to be our roof. Now let's take this a step further before we call this quits. Let's go ahead and we're going to add a reflection to our windows. Okay, so we're not going to have a solid color to our windows, but what you might have is maybe a reflection of either the sky, or you might have maybe a reflection of the surrounding scenery. Okay, so you might consider that as an option. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go to File, Place. I've already found this option, but just like before, you could go to Creative Commons and search different background images. I'm going to do File, Place, and in my thumb drive I've already found this. Okay, so I'm going to do File, Place, and I'm going to enlarge it so that it fills all of my windows like so. Something to also consider is to make sure that the ground plane of your reflection is also equivalent to the ground plane of your background image. So that looks pretty good. That's probably ideally about what I want. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Place. Yes. Okay. I am going to bring this a little bit closer to the top. All right, I'm going to hide that for now. And I'm going to go back to my layer 0. I'm going to select all of my windows. And let's see. Instead of doing that, using the magic wand tool there, I'm actually going to use my my quick selection tool to fill up these windows. Okay. Come on now. Sorry, being just a little fussy. Stop doing that. Okay, sorry, let's go back to my magic wand tool. Okay, so that looks like we have all of our windows. Okay, perfect. So I have all of my windows selected, and then again, just like we did for our previous couple images, we can then go and turn on the reflection image. I'm going to click on it and select it. And then I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and add my layer mask. Okay, so now we have a reflection in our windows, but we can do a couple more things to make it a little bit more realistic. Okay, we're going to want to first probably turn down the opacity. Okay, so maybe we bring down the opacity to something really nice and soft. Maybe it's about like that, so that you barely kind of see it. You don't want it to be overpowering to your image, right? Okay, so you might bring it down to look something just like that, just so that you barely see the background, the reflection of those trees and some of the grass. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it like that. I can then go and turn on my ground plane. Okay. Notice that our ground plane, we're going to want to move our stone texture just below the ground plane. Okay, there we go. And we're pretty much at the point to where we're about done. Okay, I'm going to do just a couple more things to make this a little bit more dramatic. I'm going to duplicate my shadow layer to make the shadows a little bit more intense. Okay, so now those shadows are a little darker. You might experiment with using your dodge and burn tool to kind of add a little bit of a gradient to your shadows. So I might add kind of some darker shadows below that ledge to make this pop a little bit more, make it look a little bit more realistic. What are some other things that you might do? You might add a person in your image. You might add a person to create a little bit of an object for scale, okay? So you might do file place. I already have a few people from earlier in the semester. So let's try this guy, or there's a couple people, that works. So I think about right now, they're actually probably almost about the perfect scale. So I'm gonna go ahead and leave them in like that. Maybe they're off to the side just a little bit and they're not quite blocking our building. Okay, I'm gonna move them up just a little bit. Raise them up. Okay, I'd say that looks pretty good. Now, of course, I could spend a little bit more time on this, make this a little bit more realistic. Any questions before we move on? Any questions? Good? All right, I'm gonna go ahead and pause the recording there.